I wasn't the kind of guy who usually paid attention to emergency alerts. The buzzing notifications that interrupted TV shows or popped up on my phone were always some storm warning or Amber Alert counties away. They never had anything to do with me. That's why, when my television turned on by itself that night, I wasn't immediately scared. I was annoyed. I lived alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of town, a forgettable little unit with outdated carpeting and thin walls. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I worked long hours, so by the time I got home, all I wanted was a quiet night. That night was no different. I had just finished dinner and was about to get ready for bed when I heard the click of the TV turning on in the living room. A soft, bluish glow flickered from the screen, illuminating my couch and coffee table. I frowned. My remote sat untouched on the table. I was sure I hadn't left the TV on. Maybe I'd sat on the remote earlier and hit the timer setting. That seemed logical. I grabbed the remote and pointed it at the screen, ready to shut it off. That's when the emergency alert sound blared through the speakers. I nearly dropped the remote as the piercing tone rattled my skull. My TV screen turned a harsh red, displaying the words, "Emergency Alert System, National Broadcast." I stared, my pulse kicking up a notch. It was strange. Usually these alerts were regional, tied to specific locations. But this one was different. Below the header, more text appeared. "Do not watch. If your TV turns on by itself, look away immediately." I squinted at the message. "Do not watch." That was a weird instruction. And what did it mean by, "if your TV turns on by itself"? Mine had turned on by itself. Was this some kind of prank? I checked my phone, but there were no alerts. No storm warnings. No notifications. I glanced back at the TV. The screen remained frozen on the message. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the emergency alert disappeared. The TV screen cut to static. A quiet hum filled the room. The kind of faint electrical buzz you don't usually notice unless everything else is completely silent. I swallowed hard. The static shouldn't have been there. I had streaming services, not cable. My TV wasn't even capable of showing static. And yet, there it was. For a long moment, I considered turning the TV off. I even lifted the remote, my thumb hovering over the power button. But something kept me watching. A shape moved within the static. It was subtle at first, a vague shadow shifting behind the waves of black and white noise. I leaned in, heart hammering. It could have been my imagination, but the longer I stared, the more certain I became. Something was in the static. The shape grew clearer, an outline of a person. I blinked. The static flickered, distorting violently, and then, a face appeared on the screen. I recoiled so hard I nearly fell backward. The face wasn't normal. It didn't belong to any news anchor or emergency official. It wasn't grainy footage of a missing person or a glitchy remnant of an old broadcast. The face in the static was staring directly at me. Its features were indistinct, warped by interference, but I could tell it had eyes. Hollow, sunken sockets that didn't blink. The longer I stared, the more I felt the impossible sensation of being watched from the other side of the screen. The air in my apartment felt heavier. I reached for the remote again, suddenly desperate to turn it off, but before I could press the button, the face smiled. The entire TV screen jerked violently forward, like the image itself was trying to break free. I stumbled back, heart pounding. The static screeched, the pitch rising, and then, the power in my apartment flickered. The lights dimmed. The TV screen pulsed, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a hand reaching forward from the static, as if pushing against the glass. Then, everything shut off. Darkness swallowed the room. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I stood frozen, gripping the remote so tightly my knuckles ached. My heart pounded in my ears. My apartment was completely silent now, but that unnatural feeling of being watched hadn't left. I exhaled slowly and forced myself to move. My fingers fumbled against the wall until I found the light switch. I flipped it on. The bulbs flickered before stabilizing. The warm, artificial glow felt comforting, normal. I turned back to the TV. It was off. The screen reflected my living room like a dark mirror, nothing more. No static. No face. I let out a nervous laugh, though it sounded forced. What the hell was that? I muttered to myself. I grabbed my phone again and checked for any updates, but there was still nothing. No alerts. No news. If this had been a real emergency broadcast, wouldn't someone be talking about it? I opened a search engine and typed, "TV turned on by itself emergency alert." The results were useless. Just forum posts about technical glitches, power surges, and creepypastas. I sighed, rubbing my face. Maybe that's all this was, a glitch. A freak power surge. My mind playing tricks on me. Still, I wasn't about to take any chances. I unplugged the TV. I even double-checked that the cord was fully out of the wall before heading to my bedroom. Despite my exhaustion, sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smiling face in the static. And the worst part, even after I unplugged the TV, I could have sworn I heard the faint sound of static crackling somewhere in the dark. I woke up to the sound of static. For a moment, I thought it was part of a dream, faint white noise humming just outside my consciousness. But as I stirred, the realization hit me hard. I had unplugged the TV. My eyes snapped open. The room was dark, save for the dim red glow of my digital alarm clock. 3:12 a.m. The static was real. It wasn't loud, more like a soft buzz drifting through the apartment, subtle enough that someone else might not have noticed it. But I did. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. It wasn't coming from the living room. It was coming from inside my bedroom. I turned my head toward my desk, where my laptop screen was on. A cold chill ran down my spine. I was sure I had closed it before going to bed. My laptop wasn't even supposed to turn on by itself. It had a dead battery unless it was plugged in. And I knew for a fact that I hadn't plugged it in. Slowly, I swung my legs over the side of the bed, keeping my breathing steady. The static wasn't deafening like before, but it was there, persistent. I stood and moved toward the laptop. The screen flickered, casting shifting shadows across my bedroom walls. A grainy black and white image filled the screen, not my desktop. Not anything I had opened before. It was a live feed of my apartment. My heart slammed against my ribs. The camera angle was from inside my living room, positioned at a high corner where no camera should be. I saw my couch, my coffee table, the unplugged TV facing the empty room. Then the feed shifted. The image zoomed, tilting slightly like someone adjusting a hidden camera. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't a recording. This was happening right now. The feed lingered for a moment, then slowly panned toward the hallway, toward my bedroom door. I felt my stomach drop. A shadow passed by the screen. Not mine. Something else was in my apartment. A sharp knock rattled my bedroom door. I stumbled backward, heart pounding so loudly I swore it would burst from my chest. The knock wasn't frantic, not aggressive. Just a single, deliberate tap. Then silence. My pulse roared in my ears. I stood frozen, staring at the door, my body caught between fight and flight. I had no weapon, no way to defend myself if someone, or something, was on the other side. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, fingers shaking as I tried to call 911. No signal. I swore under my breath, gripping the device tighter. No bars. No Wi-Fi. That wasn't possible. The connection had been fine earlier. My mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of this. Was it a power outage? A disruption? Something else? Another knock. My breath hitched. Knock. It was slow, deliberate. Like whoever, or whatever, was there wanted me to react. I clenched my jaw, stepping closer to the door. Who's there? Silence. I waited, heart hammering. A full 30 seconds passed. A minute. Nothing. I grabbed the closest thing resembling a weapon, an old metal flashlight, before taking a slow breath and gripping the doorknob. My hand trembled as I turned it. I yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. A deep, suffocating silence filled the air, heavier than before. My apartment was small. If someone had been standing there, they wouldn't have had time to hide. I swallowed, stepping into the hallway. The air felt wrong, charged with something I couldn't explain. Then I noticed something on the floor. A piece of paper. I hesitated before bending down to pick it up. It was an old yellowed sheet, rough around the edges, like it had been ripped from a book. 3 words were scrawled across it in jagged handwriting. Do not watch. My blood ran cold. The emergency alert. The message. It was the same warning. But where the hell had this paper come from? I forced myself to keep moving, gripping the flashlight as I made my way toward the living room. My body tensed as I turned the corner, half expecting to see someone standing there. But the living room was just as I'd left it. The TV was still unplugged. The couch, the table, everything was in place. Then my eyes locked onto my front door. It was unlocked. A fresh wave of nausea rolled through me. I knew I had locked it before going to bed. I always did. Someone had been inside. I moved quickly, locking the door and double-checking it before scanning the room again. Every shadow, every corner, every possible hiding place. Nothing. But something still felt off. The laptop. I turned back to my bedroom, dread pooling in my stomach. The screen was still on, still buzzing with soft static. I forced myself to walk over and shut it. The moment it clicked shut, the static stopped. Silence. I exhaled, running a hand down my face. My pulse was still racing, but at least the noise was gone. I needed answers. I needed to know if anyone else had experienced this. Grabbing my phone, I restarted it, hoping the signal would return. When it powered back on, I immediately checked my messages. One new notification. It wasn't from a friend or a missed call. It was another emergency alert. My stomach twisted as I opened it. Emergency alert system, local warning. Avoid your reflections. They do not move with you. I stared at the message, my breath catching in my throat. I turned my head toward the dark TV screen. My own reflection stared back at me. And for a split second, just before I looked away, it smiled. I didn't sleep. After the emergency alert about my reflection, I shut off my phone and sat on the edge of my bed, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. My apartment was too quiet. I could hear every creak, every shift in the walls. The sound of my own breathing felt deafening. And then there was the TV screen. Even turned off, even unplugged, it still felt like it was watching me. I forced myself to look away. I needed to get out of here. By the time the first hints of morning light slipped through my curtains, I had a plan. Get out of the apartment, find someone who could confirm I wasn't going insane. Someone had to have seen the emergency alert. Someone had to know something. I grabbed my phone and checked my messages. Still no service. That was strange enough by itself. Was my connection really down, or was it something else? A fresh wave of unease rolled over me. I got dressed quickly, grabbed my keys, and stepped into the hallway. The building was silent. I lived in a small apartment complex, the kind with thin walls where you could always hear a neighbor's TV or the distant hum of a shower. But today, nothing. No one in the hallway. No sounds from the other units. I shook it off, heading downstairs. The front door was unlocked, and as I stepped outside, I was immediately relieved to see other people. The city was still moving. Cars rumbled down the street, joggers passed by, a bus hissed as it pulled up to a stop. Normal life was still happening. Maybe I just had a breakdown. I made my way toward a nearby coffee shop, trying to shake the lingering paranoia. Inside, the warmth of brewing coffee and quiet conversation made me feel slightly better. A few people sat at tables, absorbed in their laptops and phones. I ordered a coffee, then sat near the window, pulling out my phone again. Still no signal. That's when I noticed something. People around me were checking their phones, scrolling, texting, but their faces were blank. Expressionless. The woman at the table beside me was staring at her phone screen, her fingers poised to type, but she wasn't moving. I frowned. Then at the counter, the barista stopped mid-motion, holding a cup just before placing it on the counter. Frozen. A chill crawled down my spine. Every person in the cafe sat perfectly still, like their bodies had paused, but their minds hadn't. Then all at once, they moved again. The barista set the cup down. The woman beside me finished her text. Conversations resumed as if nothing had happened. My stomach twisted. Had I imagined that? I hesitated, then unlocked my phone and tried searching for the emergency alert again. Still nothing. I glanced at the TV mounted in the corner of the cafe, half expecting static. Instead, it was just the morning news. A car accident on the highway. A missing person case. But then something made my breath catch. At the bottom of the screen, where news headlines scrolled past, I saw it. Broadcast interference reported in multiple states. Viewer discretion advised. I leaned forward, gripping my coffee cup. Interference? Was this connected to what I saw? I needed to talk to someone. I paid for my coffee and left, heading straight to work. I didn't have many close friends, but my co-worker, Tyler, was the kind of guy who kept up with weird news. If anyone had heard about this, he would have. The office was already buzzing when I arrived. I walked past rows of cubicles, my nerves still frayed from the night before. Tyler's desk was near the back, and when I found him, he was hunched over his computer, scrolling through something with an intense look. Tyler. He glanced up. Dude, you saw it too. A fresh chill ran down my spine. Saw what? Tyler lowered his voice. The broadcast. The emergency alert. My mouth went dry. You saw it? He nodded, pulling out his phone. It came through around midnight. I tried looking it up, but there's nothing official about it. Just a couple of weird forum posts, and... He hesitated. I leaned in. And what? He turned his phone screen toward me. It was a still frame from a TV broadcast, grainy, distorted, but clear enough to make my stomach churn. A face in the static, the same one I had seen on my own screen. Staring, smiling. Tyler exhaled. People are saying that if you watch too long, you start seeing things even when the TV's off. I swallowed hard. I think it's some kind of signal hijack, Tyler continued. Like a pirate broadcast, except no one knows where it's coming from. I shook my head. That doesn't explain the alerts. And I saw more than just a broadcast, Tyler. My TV turned on by itself. I got messages before my phone lost service. And I think someone was in my apartment last night. His expression darkened. You think it's related? I hesitated. It had to be. Before I could answer, Tyler's phone buzzed. He frowned, checking the screen. Then his face went pale. What? I asked. He turned the phone toward me. New emergency alert. Do not watch. Do not listen. Do not trust your reflection. A lump formed in my throat. It was the same alert I had gotten earlier. Then my phone vibrated too. I pulled it out, and my stomach dropped. The same exact message. Across the office, I saw people checking their phones, confused expressions on their faces. More phones buzzed. More heads turned toward their screens. The emergency alert wasn't just for me anymore. Then, without warning, every screen in the office turned to static. Computers, TVs, even phones. A low, humming static filled the air. I heard someone gasp. A woman near the break room backed away from the TV, her face drained of all color. What the hell? Someone muttered. I turned toward Tyler, but he wasn't looking at me anymore. His eyes were locked on the glass window that separated our office from the hallway. I followed his gaze. The reflections in the glass weren't moving. For a long, terrifying second, everyone's reflections stood perfectly still, even as the real people moved. Then, as one, the reflections turned their heads toward us. And they smiled. The moment our reflections moved without us, the office erupted into chaos. Someone screamed. Chairs scraped against the floor. Papers flew as people stumbled back from their desks. The reflections in the glass still stood there, grinning, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. Then, one by one, they started stepping away. Not our real selves, our reflections. I grabbed Tyler's arm. We have to go. He didn't move at first, transfixed by the way his reflection turned away from him and walked into the depths of the mirrored hallway, vanishing into the darkness. Tyler! I shook him. That snapped him out of it. He cursed under his breath and turned away from the glass, his face pale. All around us, people were panicking. Some were frantically shaking their monitors, trying to get the static to stop. Others bolted for the exit. The emergency alert had been real, and now we were in the middle of whatever was happening. I took one last glance at the reflections. Most of them were gone now, disappeared beyond the glass. But one remained. Mine. My own reflection stood there, staring straight at me, even as I turned away. Then, in a slow, jerking motion, it lifted a hand and pointed at me. My stomach twisted. Tyler grabbed my arm. Dude, go! I forced my legs to move. We ran toward the stairwell, nearly colliding with a group of employees trying to push their way out. The office was descending into madness. Half the people were screaming. The other half were standing still, their faces blank, eyes locked on their screens. I shoved past them, heart hammering. The moment we made it to the stairwell, I grabbed my phone and tried checking for a signal again. Still nothing. Tyler was already ahead of me, sprinting down the stairs 2 at a time. What the hell is happening? He panted. I didn't have an answer. I just knew we needed to get away from the screens. As we hit the 2nd floor, a sudden boom echoed from above, like something slammed into the glass. I risked a glance up. Through the stairwell window, I caught a glimpse of the office floor we had just left. The reflections were back. Only this time, they weren't just watching. They were crawling through the glass. I grabbed Tyler's sleeve. Run. We took the stairs so fast I nearly tripped. By the time we burst through the lobby doors, we weren't the only ones. Other employees spilled out into the street, phones clutched in their hands, faces twisted in fear. The second we stepped outside, everything felt wrong. The air was too still. Cars sat motionless at a red light, their drivers staring blankly ahead. Pedestrians were frozen mid-step, as if caught between moments. Then all at once, their heads snapped toward us. I stopped dead in my tracks. Tyler swore under his breath. Every single one of them, dozens of people, stared at us with unnatural grins. Then as one, they took a step forward. Tyler grabbed my arm. We need to get out of here. We ran. down the block, past the frozen cars, past people who weren't people anymore. I didn't know where we were going. I just knew we had to keep moving. We turned a corner and nearly crashed into a woman. She wasn't like the others. Her eyes weren't glazed over, and she wasn't smiling. She looked terrified. "Are you?" I started. She grabbed me by the shoulders, breathing hard. "You saw it too?" Tyler and I exchanged glances. "The alert?" I asked. She nodded frantically. "It's not just here. It's everywhere. Every TV, every screen, it's spreading." I swallowed hard. "What are they?" She shook her head. "I don't know. But they're not people. They come from the static." A chill ran down my spine. Behind us, the murmuring of voices grew louder. The people we had passed, the smiling ones, were still following. The woman grabbed my wrist. "Come on. I know somewhere safe." We didn't argue. She led us through a narrow alley, weaving between dumpsters and abandoned bikes. Finally, she stopped in front of a small bookstore. It was dark inside. The windows were covered with newspapers. A handwritten sign on the door read, "No screens inside." She knocked 3 times. A moment later, the door unlocked. She pushed it open and motioned for us to follow. Inside, it was cramped, cluttered with bookshelves and stacks of old newspapers. The only light came from dim candles scattered around the room. A group of people sat in the back, huddled together, whispering. An older man, gray beard, thick glasses, looked up from a map. His expression darkened when he saw us. "More of you, huh?" he muttered. The woman shut the door, bolting it. Tyler and I caught our breath. "What is this place?" I asked. The older man sighed. "The only safe place left." Tyler frowned. "Safe from what?" The man gestured toward the covered windows. "Them." The bookstore was silent for a moment, save for the distant hum of the outside world. I swallowed hard. "What are they?" The man rubbed a hand over his face. "Nobody knows. They started appearing with the broadcast interruptions. At first, people thought it was just a hoax, some weird hacker messing with signals. But then the emergency alerts started. People reported seeing things in their TVs, in their reflections." His eyes darkened. Then the disappearances started. A heavy silence filled the room. The woman crossed her arms. "The signal is spreading. The more people see it, the more it spreads." My stomach churned. That meant I had spread it too. Tyler seemed to realize the same thing. He took a shaky breath. "How do we stop it?" The older man hesitated. Then he picked up an old, tattered notebook and slid it toward us. On the cover, scrawled in red ink, were 4 words. "Do not watch it." I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were sketches of faces and static. Pages filled with warnings, notes scribbled in frantic handwriting. And one passage, underlined over and over again. "If you see it, it sees you. If you hear it, it knows you. If you understand it." The sentence cut off. A fresh chill ran down my spine. Then, a knock at the door. Everyone in the room froze. Then, in a sickeningly familiar pattern, knock, knock, knock. Slow, deliberate, and then a voice muffled through the wood. Low, distorted. "Let us in." Knock, knock, knock. The sound sent a shiver through the room. The bookstore had been dead silent just moments before, just the flicker of candlelight and the hushed whispers of people trying to make sense of the madness. But now, with that thing knocking outside, the silence turned into something else. Something sharp, something wrong. The woman who had led us here, Mallory, she said her name was, slowly backed away from the door. Tyler tensed beside me. No one in the room moved. Then the voice came. "Let us in." Low, warped, like 100 voices layered over each other. The older man, Bill, the one who seemed to be in charge, lifted a finger to his lips. "Don't speak. Don't make a sound." My pulse thundered in my ears. Then, "Please, we need help." A different voice this time. A woman's. Trembling, fragile. I clenched my fists. No, I wasn't falling for that. I'd seen what these things could do. I'd seen the way they moved through the glass, through the screens. This wasn't some lost stranger looking for help. It was them. The older man, Bill, took a slow step toward the door, his hands shaking. His face was grim, like he'd been through this before. The voice on the other side continued. "Please, they're coming for me." The way she said it, the exact cadence, the precise desperation in her tone, sent a wave of nausea through me. It was too perfect, too rehearsed. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. Mallory reached for something on a nearby shelf, a rusted old hunting knife. She gripped it tight. The others in the room barely breathed. Then, from outside, a scrape, like fingernails dragging against wood. My stomach turned. Then, something else. A faint, barely audible humming. The same low, unnatural frequency I had heard when my TV had turned on by itself. When the office screens filled with static, I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Then the knocking started again. Harder. Faster. Let US in. Let US in. Let US in. The door shook against the force of it. Candles flickered. One of the people in the room, some guy sitting on the floor near the back, let out a choked sob. The moment the sound left his mouth, the knocking stopped. Dead silence. Then, "We hear you." The voice wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the room. A cold, suffocating dread crawled up my spine. Bill reacted first. "Blow out the lights." Mallory moved instantly, snuffing the candles with swift motions of her fingers. One by one, the flames died, plunging us into darkness. I squeezed my eyes shut. My pulse thundered in my ears. And then, a shift in the air, like something was moving in the room with us. I heard someone breathing, too close, right behind me. I clenched my fists. "Don't move. Don't speak." Then a whisper, directly against my ear. "We see you." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. The room felt wrong, twisted, like reality itself was folding in on itself. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The air settled. The unnatural presence lifted. I waited, heart pounding. Bill relit a candle. The small flickering flame cast trembling shadows against the walls. The door was still shut. The knocking was gone. Whatever had been in here was gone too. For now. Mallory exhaled shakily. That was too close. Tyler rubbed his arms, visibly shaken. "What the hell was that?" Bill didn't answer right away. He just took a deep breath, then turned toward the rest of the group. "We have to leave." A murmur rippled through the room. One of the others, a young man barely older than me, shook his head. "Leave? Go where? It's worse out there." Bill's expression darkened. "It'll be worse here soon. They know we're in this place now. It won't be safe much longer." I swallowed hard. He was right. The emergency alerts, the static, the things in the reflections, it was spreading. And now it had found us. Mallory sheathed her knife. "We need a plan." Bill nodded. "We find out where the signal is coming from." I frowned. "How?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small and rectangular. "A radio." I blinked. "You want to listen to the signal?" He shook his head. "No. I want to track it." Tyler rubbed his face. "Are you serious? What if we just leave the city?" Mallory scoffed. "You think running is gonna help? You saw the alert. It's everywhere." Tyler didn't argue. Bill adjusted the dials on the radio. Static crackled. A deep, pulsing hum flickered through the speakers, one that sent a sharp, piercing pain straight through my skull. I winced. Then, buried within the distortion, a voice. Faint, distant. "Not safe, do not watch." The same warning I had gotten before. Then suddenly, "If you see them, run." I stiffened. The voice continued, more frantic now. "They are coming." The signal cut out. Silence. Bill turned off the radio. His face was grim. "We move now." Mallory grabbed a backpack from beneath the counter. A few others in the room gathered what little they had. I exchanged a glance with Tyler. We didn't have a choice. The only way to survive was to find out what the hell was happening. Because whatever this was, it wasn't just a broadcast. It was something alive, something that wanted in. And I had a horrible feeling that next time, it wouldn't need to knock. We left the bookstore in silence. No one spoke as we moved through the empty streets, sticking to the shadows, avoiding any reflective surfaces. The air felt wrong, too still, too hollow, like the world had been scrubbed clean of sound. Bill led the way, gripping the radio like a lifeline. Tyler stayed close to me, his face pale, eyes darting in every direction. Mallory walked a few steps ahead, keeping one hand on the knife at her hip. We weren't alone. The city wasn't empty. The people were still out there, but they weren't right. They stood motionless on sidewalks, inside parked cars, behind windows. Their heads were tilted at unnatural angles, their smiles too wide. Some of them had their eyes closed, but others were watching us. Their gazes followed us as we passed. And I had the sinking feeling that if we looked at them for too long, if we really looked, something horrible would happen. We turned a corner, moving toward the subway entrance. That's when we saw them. A row of televisions. The electronics store on the corner had a display of old, outdated screens, the glass reflecting the flickering streetlights. All of them were on, but they weren't playing anything. Just static. Then, the static shifted. Shapes moved inside the screens, like something was pushing against the glass from the other side. Hands. Faces. Twisting, stretching. A sound rose from the speakers. Low. Humming. I froze. The humming grew louder. My skull throbbed. I felt something pulling me toward the screens, urging me to step closer, to stare. I took a shaky breath, willing myself to look away. Mallory wasn't moving. She stood right in front of the TVs, eyes locked onto the shifting figures. Her expression was blank, her pupils blown wide. Her lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. I grabbed her arm. Mallory. She didn't react. The humming intensified. The shapes in the screens twisted, contorted. Then, one of them turned its head toward her and smiled. Something deep inside me screamed. I ripped her away from the televisions. She stumbled backward, gasping like she had just surfaced from deep water. What? Don't look at them, I hissed. Bill yanked the radio from his pocket, turning the dial frantically. Static crackled. A voice burst through the speaker. Do not look at their faces. Do not acknowledge them. I clenched my jaw. Too late. A horrible wet sound echoed through the street, like something crawling out of a tight space. I turned back toward the TVs, and they were gone. The screens were blank, filled only with static. But something had come through. A shape moved in the reflection of the glass. Something tall, wrong, limbs stretching too far, bending in ways they shouldn't. And it was coming toward us. Tyler cursed under his breath. Run. We bolted. The air felt heavier as we ran, like we were moving through something thick and unseen. The city blurred around us, streetlights flickering. Behind us, the thing moved. Not footsteps, no, something worse. It glided. It shifted, like it wasn't part of this world at all, just an imitation of something real. The subway entrance loomed ahead, a dark hole in the ground. Bill made it there first, practically leaping down the steps. Tyler followed, then Mallory. I was the last, and just before I descended, I felt it. A hand. Cold. Too many fingers. It brushed the back of my neck. I slammed into the subway tunnel, nearly collapsing onto the platform. Bill grabbed my arm, dragging me away from the entrance. For a moment, everything was still. Then, a whisper. Low, right at the base of my skull. We see you. I choked down a breath. The darkness of the subway pressed in around us. The only light came from the distant, flickering bulbs along the tracks. We need to keep moving, Bill said, his voice sharp. Mallory was still shaken, eyes darting toward the stairwell. What the hell was that? Bill's face was grim. They're closer now. Tyler wiped sweat from his forehead. So what's the plan? Where are we even going? Bill turned the radio in his hands. The static shifted. Then, through the distortion, Station 42 safe, follow the signal. Tyler frowned. Station 42? Bill nodded. There's an abandoned subway stop a few miles underground. No cameras, no screens. If there's anywhere we can regroup, it's there. Mallory crossed her arms. And if it's not safe? Bill didn't answer. I exhaled slowly. The subway tunnel stretched ahead of us, dark and endless. There were no working trains anymore. No people. Just us. And them. I forced myself to move forward. Tyler followed. Then Mallory. Bill adjusted the radio, guiding us deeper into the tunnels. Somewhere behind us, above us, maybe all around us, the humming continued. Low. Distorted. The same frequency that had started all of this. And deep inside my skull, buried beneath the static, I could still hear its voice. We are coming. I swallowed hard. No more reflections. No more screens. But I knew. It was still watching. We moved deeper into the subway tunnels, leaving the last flickering station lights behind. The air grew colder, thick with dampness and the scent of rusting metal. Our footsteps echoed against the concrete, swallowed quickly by the overwhelming silence. Bill walked ahead, the radio clutched tight in his hands. Mallory followed close behind, eyes scanning the darkness. Tyler walked beside me, his breathing shallow. The only sound came from the radio's static, soft, constant. But beneath it, something was shifting. Something was speaking. Not words. Not yet. But breathing. A soft, slow inhale. A rasping exhale. Like something was listening. Waiting. My pulse hammered in my ears. I focused on the tracks beneath us, the cracked concrete, the scattered debris. Anything to avoid looking into the dark. Because if I looked too long, I was afraid I'd see them. afraid they'd see me back. Station 42. After what felt like hours of walking, the walls began to change. Old posters lined the tunnels, faded, curling at the edges. Half of them were torn, revealing glimpses of something else beneath. Mallory slowed, running a hand over one of them. This isn't right. I stepped closer. At first glance, the poster looked like an old movie ad. Some forgotten horror flick, maybe. But beneath the peeling edges, something was watching us. A face. Stretched. Twisted. Too many eyes. The moment I saw it, a sharp pain stabbed through my skull. I jerked back as a distorted sound hissed from the radio. Something between a growl and a static pop. Mallory yanked her hand away from the poster. The pain vanished. The hissing stopped. I sucked in a shaky breath. What the hell was that? Bill's jaw tightened. We keep moving. None of us argued. A few minutes later, we reached the entrance to Station 42. It wasn't much, a set of rusted doors sealed long ago. An old, faded sign above it read, 42, Service Platform. Bill gripped the handles and pulled. The doors groaned open. Darkness waited beyond. Mallory lifted her flashlight, sweeping it through the space. The station was huge, wider than a normal platform, with old maintenance tunnels branching off into unseen depths. And it was empty. No people. No screens. Just silence. Bill exhaled, stepping inside. We'll regroup here. Figure out the next move. I hesitated before following. Something about this place felt wrong, but compared to the things outside, it was the best shot we had. We moved toward the center of the station. That's when I noticed it. The floor was covered in shattered glass. Mallory's flashlight reflected 1,000 tiny cracks of light. I stepped carefully, my stomach twisting. There were no mirrors here. No screens. So where had the glass come from? I didn't want to find out. The broadcast changes. Bill set the radio down on an old bench, turning the dial carefully. The static warped, flickering between bursts of white noise and something else. A voice. But it wasn't the same as before. This time it was clearer. Danger. Tyler stepped closer. What did it say? Bill turned the volume up. The static crackled, shifting between words. Do not stay, do not listen. Mallory crossed her arms. It's a little late for that. The radio screeched. All of us flinched as a new sound poured through the speaker. Laughter. Not human. Not even close. It was layered, overlapping, like a dozen voices speaking at once. Some too high, others too low. The station felt colder. Bill grabbed the radio, twisting the dial. No, not yet. The laughter stopped, and a new voice spoke. Not distorted, not distant. It was right there. You should not have come here. I stiffened. The voice was familiar. I knew it, because it was mine. Bill slammed the radio off. Silence crashed over us. Tyler's hands were shaking. Mallory was staring at the radio like it might start moving on its own. Bill cursed under his breath. It's changing. I swallowed hard. What the hell does that mean? Bill's face was pale. It's not just broadcasting anymore. He glanced toward the tunnels. It's speaking to us. A heavy thud echoed from somewhere in the darkness. We all froze. Another thud. Closer. A rhythmic dragging sound followed. Something large moving through the tunnels. My breath hitched. They had found us. Mallory grabbed her knife. We need to move. Now. Bill didn't argue. He grabbed the radio, stuffing it into his jacket, and we started toward the far side of the platform. There was another exit there, another way out. The sound behind us grew louder. A deep, wet gurgling. I didn't look back. Tyler's breathing was ragged. Where are we going? Maintenance tunnels, Bill said, pushing forward. If we can get underground, we might be able to. The station lights flickered. The overhead bulbs burst, glass shattering around us. And for a split second, just a heartbeat, I saw them. Standing at the edge of the platform. Not people. Not anymore. Their faces were blank. Just smooth, stretched skin where their eyes and mouths should be. But I could feel them watching. They didn't need eyes to see us. Mallory grabbed my arm. Run. We bolted toward the tunnel entrance. The air was thick with static, buzzing against my skull. The sound behind us shifted, not footsteps. Something else. Like movement in a screen. Like flickering frames. I reached the tunnel first, practically throwing myself into the darkness. The others followed, scrambling through the narrow passage. The static grew louder. The walls felt wrong, warping, shifting. Reality itself was coming apart. I gasped for air, heart hammering. Then ahead of us, a light. a flickering screen, and reflected in the glass, something was smiling back at us. The flickering light ahead froze me in place. I wasn't sure what I was looking at. At first, it seemed like another old monitor, the kind you'd see in forgotten subway tunnels, mounted high on the wall. But as I focused, the details twisted, the shape, the glass, the movement behind the screen. There was something inside, not a reflection, not a broadcast, something watching, and it was smiling. Mallory grabbed my arm. "Don't look." I forced my gaze away, my pulse pounding. Bill was ahead, gripping the radio so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Tyler was behind me, breathing fast, his footsteps uneven. The tunnel walls narrowed as we moved forward. Something was wrong. They shouldn't be this tight. The maintenance tunnel should have led deeper underground, but the space around us felt like it was shrinking, closing in. I risked a glance behind us. The passage we'd come through was gone. Just a solid wall of darkness stretching endlessly in both directions. Mallory noticed it too. Where the hell is the station?" Bill didn't answer. He turned the radio dial, his jaw clenched. Static crackled. Then, the whispering started again. Not from the radio, from the walls. A voice, many voices, overlapping, speaking in broken fragments. "See you watching, all of us." The screens flickered. Tyler staggered, pressing his hands to his ears. "I can't." Mallory grabbed his arm, shaking him. "Tyler, focus." Bill's breathing was harsh. "Keep moving." The tunnel curved sharply, revealing another screen up ahead. This one was different. It was bigger, too big, like a window into something else. The glow from the screen bathed the tunnel in pale blue light, casting deep shadows. The static buzzed through my skull, pressing against my thoughts. I could feel them inside, watching, waiting, calling to us. Bill stopped just short of the screen. "We can't go through." Mallory turned, her expression sharp. "Then where the hell do we go?" Bill was shaking his head, his grip tightening on the radio. The static grew louder. I swallowed hard. There has to be another way. Then, the screen changed. The static flickered, the image shifting. And I saw myself, standing there, staring at the screen. Not a reflection, not a recording. It was me. But something was wrong. The other me wasn't moving. It was just standing there, smiling. Then, it blinked. I took a step back, my entire body going cold. Mallory grabbed my wrist. "What?" I don't know," I stammered. "I think it's..." The screen shattered. A burst of light and sound ripped through the tunnel. A wave of static so loud I felt it vibrate through my skull. I clamped my hands over my ears as the walls warped, twisted. Something came through. I didn't see it, not fully. But I felt it, moving, unfolding. A shape, stretching from the broken screen. Something that shouldn't exist outside of glass. The static screamed. Bill grabbed my arm and yanked me forward. "Run!" We bolted. The tunnel around us warped and pulsed, the walls no longer solid. The air felt thick, like we were moving through liquid, our steps dragging, our bodies sluggish. Something was behind us, moving fast. Its footsteps weren't normal. They were skipping, like frames in a corrupted video. The tunnels bent, curved, impossible angles. I didn't know where we were going anymore. I just knew we had to keep running. Tyler stumbled, his breath ragged. I can't." Mallory grabbed him, half dragging him forward. The static was inside me now. Not just a sound, an idea. Like something was rewriting me, changing me. And then, we broke through. The tunnel spat us out onto a new platform. A real platform. I collapsed onto the cold concrete, gasping for breath. The air was thick with dust and rot. Old train tracks stretched into the distance, rusted and abandoned. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then, Tyler sat up, looking around. Where the hell are we?" Bill turned in a slow circle, his face pale. "This," he swallowed hard. "This isn't the subway." Mallory's expression darkened. "Then what is it?" Bill's fingers curled around the radio. The static had stopped. The device was completely silent. I stood up on shaking legs, looking down the tracks. There were more screens here, old CRT monitors hanging from the ceiling, cracked and covered in grime. Most of them were off, but one of them was on. Mallory followed my gaze. No, we are not doing this again." But I was already stepping toward it. I couldn't help it. The screen glowed faintly, barely working. A distorted face flickered on the screen. Not a person, not an image, just eyes, too many of them, and a mouth that didn't move right. Then it spoke. Not through sound, not through static. It spoke inside my head. Almost here. A chill ran through my spine. The air in the station shifted. Bill took a step forward, his voice barely a whisper. "They're coming." A deep hum vibrated through the tracks. Mallory grabbed my arm. "We need to get out of here." But there was nowhere to go. The station stretched endlessly in both directions, fading into darkness. And the screens, the ones that were off, they were flickering on, one by one, all of them showing us, moving, watching. And then, the train arrived. It came from nowhere, no lights, no sound. Just black metal and glass. The doors slid open, and from inside, the static spoke my name. The train doors slid open without a sound. Cold air rushed out from the dark interior, carrying the scent of static and something metallic, like blood left to dry on old wires. No conductor, no passengers, just empty seats stretching into the dark. And that voice, my name, still echoing inside my head. Bill grabbed my arm, yanking me back. "Don't." His voice was sharp, urgent. "Don't step inside." I hadn't realized I was moving forward, like something was pulling me in. The lights in the station flickered violently, buzzing overhead. The other screens, hundreds of them, showed nothing but us, moving in a delay, like a corrupted live feed. Mallory held her knife tight. "We need to go." But where? There was nowhere to run. The platform stretched into endless darkness. The tunnel we came from was gone. And the train was waiting. Tyler's voice was shaky. "What happens if we get on?" Nobody answered. Because we didn't know. "This is the way out." The whisper slid into my skull like a needle. Bill must have heard it too. He turned the radio dial frantically, his hands shaking. Static poured from the speaker, warping between broken voices. "Not the way out, trap, repeat." The radio hissed violently, then cut out. Silence. I felt it before I saw it. A presence. Something standing behind us. Tyler's breath hitched. His eyes went wide, locked onto something over my shoulder. I turned, and I saw them. The figures from before. The ones with no eyes, no mouths, just smooth, stretched skin. Dozens of them. Standing just outside the station lights. Waiting. Not moving. Not breathing. Watching us without watching. I felt my pulse hammer in my skull. My hands shook. Bill's grip on my arm tightened. "The train," he whispered. Mallory's eyes snapped to him. "What?" Bill's voice was flat, but his expression was pure fear. "We don't have a choice." Tyler swallowed hard. We don't even know where it goes." Mallory's fingers curled tighter around her knife. "It doesn't go anywhere." She was right. This wasn't a normal subway. Nothing here was real anymore. But the figures, they were getting closer. Not walking, just existing in a way that made my head ache. Like they were skipping frames in reality. And suddenly, they were too close. We ran. I jumped onto the train first, pulling myself inside. The air was thick, heavy, like stepping through something I wasn't supposed to. Mallory shoved Tyler through next. Bill was last, slamming his hand against the panel by the door. The moment his feet left the platform, the doors slid shut. And outside, the figures moved all at once. A violent, twitching motion, their limbs bending wrong. They screamed, not a sound, but a feeling. A shuddering pulse of static and white noise that rattled through my bones. Then, the train lurched forward. The station outside ripped away into darkness. The last thing I saw was the screens, all of them flickering, showing our faces, watching us, and then we were gone. Inside the train, the interior was wrong. The seats were too clean, the windows pitch black. The walls were smooth metal, no maps, no ads, no scratches from years of passengers passing through. And the silence was too deep. I turned toward the doors. "We need to get off." Mallory's breath was uneven. "There's no way off." I glanced at the windows. They should have shown the tunnels, the tracks, something. But there was nothing outside. Just black. Like the train wasn't moving at all. Bill turned the radio dial again. Static. No voices. His expression was grim. "It's not broadcasting anymore." I took a slow breath. That should have been a good thing. But somehow it felt worse. Like we had moved too deep. Beyond the signal. Beyond anything real. Tyler spoke up, his voice hoarse. "Did you hear what the radio said?" Bill nodded. "Yeah." Tyler hesitated. "Repeat." The word sat between us, heavy. Like a weight pressing against my chest. Mallory exhaled. "What does that mean?" Bill didn't answer. Because we already knew. We were inside it now. The broadcast. The loop. This train wasn't taking us out. It was taking us back in. The train's destination. I moved down the aisle, gripping the seats for balance. The train didn't sway, didn't rock. It was too smooth, too perfect, like it wasn't real. I stopped at the first door leading to the next car. Locked. Mallory checked the other side. Same. We were trapped in this section. Then, the lights flickered. Tyler shuddered. I don't think we're alone. The static returned. Not from the radio. From the speakers overhead. A soft, glitching voice hummed through the train's intercom. Next stop. My stomach tightened. I didn't want to know. Station 42. My heart stopped. Mallory's fingers dug into her knife. Bill swore under his breath. Tyler let out a shaking laugh, but there was no humor in it. We never left, he whispered. I looked toward the windows. The darkness outside wasn't empty anymore. Shapes moved in the black, flickering, stuttering, like a video buffering in reverse. And reflected in the glass, a new screen had appeared, small, embedded in the wall. And on it, a face stared back at us. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, stretched skin. Watching, Mallory whispered, "We need to get off this train." Bill didn't move. His gaze was locked on the screen, on the thing behind the glass. Tyler reached out. "Bill." The screen flickered. And then, the voice spoke my name again. The voice whispered my name again. It slithered through the speakers, through the flickering screen in the wall. Not a recording, not a transmission. Something here was speaking to me. Bill stood frozen, his eyes locked on the screen. Tyler had gone pale, his breathing shallow. Mallory clutched her knife, so hard her knuckles were white. We were running out of time. The train was still moving, if it could even be called that. The windows showed nothing, no tunnels, no tracks. Just blackness, shifting with movement. And something was inside the dark. Watching, waiting. I forced myself to speak. "We need to get off. Now." Mallory didn't hesitate. "How?" I turned, scanning the train car. The doors were locked. The windows weren't windows at all, just screens pretending to be glass. There was only one way left. The emergency exit hatch. Tyler's eyes widened as he realized what I was thinking. You want to go outside?" I nodded. "Unless you want to see what happens when we reach Station 42. Bill finally snapped out of it. He turned toward the emergency exit, a hatch in the ceiling, barely noticeable. His jaw tightened. "Help me up." Mallory and I locked our hands together, boosting him. He tore at the hatch, fingers slipping on the metal. For a moment, it wouldn't budge. Then, the lights flickered. The screen in the wall glitched violently, and the thing on the other side moved. Its face, the smooth, eyeless skin, pressed closer, almost like it was trying to push through the glass. I felt something stir inside my skull, like my thoughts weren't my own anymore. Bill growled and ripped the hatch open. A blast of cold air surged down, carrying the scent of ozone and something metallic. He pulled himself up. "Come on." Mallory shoved Tyler toward him. "Go." Tyler hesitated, then climbed. The train rumbled violently, the screens flashing. I turned just as the doors at the end of the car slid open. I shouldn't have looked. But I did. And I saw what was waiting for us. A tall, stretched figure stepped into the train. Its skin shimmered like a distorted video. Its arms were too long, fingers bending like glitching frames. No face, no mouth, but it was watching us. It stepped forward, gliding instead of walking. The static inside my head screamed. Mallory shoved me. "Move." I jumped up, grabbing the hatch. Mallory was right behind me. As soon as she pulled herself through, the lights died, and the train plunged into absolute blackness. Outside the train, I hit solid ground, but there was no platform, no tunnels, just endless darkness stretching in all directions. Mallory, Tyler, and Bill stood beside me, their breath visible in the cold air. The train was still moving, except it wasn't on tracks anymore. It was just floating, its metal frame shuddering like an unstable broadcast. Bill's voice was hoarse. "What the hell is this place?" I didn't know, but I knew we weren't alone. I turned and saw them. Hundreds of figures, standing in the dark, tall, stretched wrong. Their bodies flickered like they weren't fully here. Or maybe we weren't. Mallory gripped my wrist. "Run." I didn't argue. We took off, sprinting into the endless void. The figures didn't move, but I could feel them shifting, like they existed in frames between our reality. And the train kept going. I turned for a split second, just in time to see the doors slide open. And the figures stepped inside. The train rumbled. The windows weren't blank anymore. They showed us, running, like we were trapped in an old recording, a memory playing on loop. Then, the train flickered out of existence, just vanished, and the silence left behind was deafening. The broadcast never ends. We didn't stop running, not until the darkness started breaking apart. It happened all at once. The static surged, the air shattered like glass, and suddenly, we were somewhere else. I collapsed onto concrete. Mallory groaned beside me. Tyler let out a sharp gasp. Bill dropped the radio. We were back. The subway station. Old, rusted, and abandoned. The flickering screens were gone. The train was nowhere in sight. I stared at the walls, the cracked tile, the graffiti, everything that proved this place was real. We were out. Mallory let out a shaky breath. We made it? Tyler started laughing, but it was the kind of laugh that was too close to crying. Bill picked up the radio, turning the dial. Nothing. No static. Just silence. Mallory grabbed my arm. Come on. We need to go. I nodded, pushing myself up. We left the station without looking back. But it wasn't over. I don't know how long we walked before we reached the surface. The city was quiet, the streets almost too empty. No sirens. No cars. Like the world hadn't noticed we were gone. Bill's voice was soft. Do you think it's really over? None of us answered, because we already knew. It wasn't. We had escaped. But somewhere, in some other version of this place, the train was still running. The broadcast was still playing. And the screens were still watching.